Hey everybody, my name is Chris Davis. I'm a Ross U High School graduate class of 2011, and I am telling you today about my job as a reporter here at the NBC affiliate in St. Louis, Missouri. It is 5 on your side, KSDK. It's actually Mrs. Smith's hometown station, and my day's different every day. I'm a general assignment reporter. I'm put on various things from crime to politics to a little bit of everything in between, but I wanted to show you what my typical day looks like in the journalism field. So I actually report for our 10 o'clock show, which means my day gets started a little bit later. I come into work at about 2 o'clock and stay until 11 o'clock or until whatever assignment I'm working on is done for the day. The first part of the day, probably from about 2 to 2:30, I spend time putting together my story pitch, researching things on social media, reaching out to different sources that I have here in the St. Louis area to come up with a story pitch. Then from 2:30 to 3, we sit around a table called the editorial meeting, where we meet with different managers and different people within our news operation and discuss, these are the stories that we're gonna work on today. So we are now out the door. This is my photographer extraordinaire, Bob Drosty, and we are working on a story today. It's actually an update to a story I did a couple weeks ago. A woman named Tiana Jones, her fiance and the father of her children was actually shot in a pretty random shooting here in the St. Louis area. She took off a few days from her work to be able to make funeral arrangements for him, and then actually was fired from her job. In a weird twist of fate, he is also her landlord, and now because she's without a job, she can no longer pay for rent, and he is in the process of evicting her. So we're gonna talk to her.
I was actually at work when my kid's father was killed. I was actually off the following day, which was a Sunday.
So now that we have all the shooting done, Bob and I are gonna stop for some food, and I'll go through all of this interview sound, pick out some of my favorite sound bites, write my story, start editing. None of this is really sexy to look at, but it's a really important process and probably takes the most time. Here's one thing I bet you didn't know. Men and women in this business have to wear a little makeup. Now women, you've had a head start on me for about 20 years. I'm catching up, but picking up some tips along the way. So we've now actually returned back out here to the scene of the crime where Tiana's boyfriend was killed, and we're gonna shoot a little intro, and the final version looks a little bit like this.
Good evening, I'm Mike Bush.
And I'm Ann Already.
Tiana's boyfriend was on a Metro bus, actually near this bus stop, when an argument escalated and he was shot and killed. She thought that would be the worst day of her life. It ended up just being one stop on a very painful journey.
I lost the love of my life.
If the saying is true that when it rains, it pours,
Since he's been gone, it's been one thing after the other.
Tiana Jones is in the need of a rescue boat. The struggle began just 2 days after the death of her boyfriend, Kenneth Pointer.
We were actually at the funeral home making his final arrangements. I called my boss well within time of my shift and let him know that I would not be able to make it in.
She says he replied with a cold-hearted text,
Telling me I was terminated. He was taking my entire last check and applying it to the balance of my rent.
To make matters worse, her boss is also her landlord. Without a job and raising 4 children now on her own, she says she's drowning in bills.
I've always paid my rent. I've always paid my way. I just asked for a little time after you terminated me to be able to find another job.
She eventually did find another job, but she doesn't start it until next month. According to her landlord, that's too little, too late.
He filed for eviction.
Unless a judge intervenes in a few weeks, this green eviction notice will become final.
My kids have lost so much already, so now they have to lose their home.
I called Tiana's former boss and landlord. He declined an interview but claimed Tiana missed too many shifts at Dr. J's liquor store and that the final absence was the final straw.
If I called off, I have a doctor's statement for it.
If there is a lifeboat in Tiana's future, it may come from the state of Missouri. I reached out to the Crime Victim Compensation Fund that supports violent crime victims along with their dependents. A spokesperson for the fund couldn't comment on a specific case, but encourages Tiana to reach out to their office because she could be a good candidate.
I definitely am going to look into that. Anything that's going to offer me any type of assistance.
And if there's a silver lining to these dark clouds, it's a valuable lesson.
This was really a conflict of interest, having him as my boss and as my landlord.
Tiana is now worried that an eviction notice will make it harder for her to find someone who will be willing to rent to her. She's now working with the group Better Family Life in hopes of finding a landlord that is willing to take her in. In North County, Chris Davis, 5 on your side.